that's the journey and that's the call. That's the blueprint that God has put into your life to be integrated, to have all the different parts of your human person being connected to God and finding joy and freedom from that.
Welcome to This Whole Life, a podcast for all of us seeking sanity and sanctity, and a place to find joy and meaning through the integration of faith and mental health. I'm Kenna Millay, a licensed marriage and family therapist, and I'm with my husband, Pat Millay, a Catholic speaker, musician, and leader. We invite you to our kitchen table. Okay, not literally, but you're definitely invited into the conversations that we seem to keep having once the kids have scattered off to play and we're left doing the dishes. We're excited to share this podcast for educational purposes. It is not intended as therapy or as a substitute for mental health care. So let's get talking about this whole life.
Hello, friends, and welcome to This Whole Life, Episode 1, the grand kickoff. Welcome aboard.
This is the beginning. Here we go.
We're so glad that you're here to start this journey with us, to walk this path of sanity and sanctity, and to have a ton of fun along the way. And we just can't wait to start this process with you.
I'm so excited to learn in the months to come. Like, who are these courageous souls that are listening to this first episode? To these people who have never, recorded a podcast ever before and are going to try to tell them something about their sanity and their sanctity. Like,
so your bravery is admirable, is what Ken is saying right now.
Yes, tell me about that.
Welcome aboard. We're so glad that you're here. We can't wait to get started. And we thought it was appropriate at the outset of this podcast journey, with you having us in your ear, that maybe you don't know who we are at all, and maybe you're wondering, why in the world would I listen to these people? Who are they even? So we wanted to give you just a little bit of background about who we are, where we're from, and why this issue of mental health and faith, the integration of those, why that's so important to us. So I am Pat Millay. You and I, my beautiful bride, have been married for 13 years. We have 7 kids, ages 11 down to 2 at this very moment. Although with as many birthdays as we have, that'll change in about 3 weeks here. So,
so true.
Current age range. What do you need to know about me? I am more extroverted than almost anyone I know, but I do still love to read, and I love to just be quiet once in a while, because in a beautiful home full of love and 9 people, quiet is sometimes hard to come by, and I very much appreciate it, even more than I used to. I learned to love football in school at Notre Dame, and football season is still one of the most glorious times of the year. I literally didn't really understand the rules of football until I went to college, and it turns out at Notre Dame that is a prerequisite to attending the school. So I had to learn real fast how first downs work, and why you wouldn't always punt on 4th down and things like that. I live for holidays and holy days, especially Christmas and Easter. And I just get like a kid during Advent, and I just want to speed up to the point where we can have the Christmas cookies and the presents and the days of pajamas and things like that. And the 3 things that God ever created that are my favorite things are chocolate, the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and really great music. Those are like my 3 favorite created things.
If we're going to be able to incorporate all 3 of those at some point into this podcast. I know Marvel we will. Great music. I guess I think about our opening song from Marie Miller.
Yep.
The chocolate, that'll be a challenge, but we'll see where it goes from here.
I think we could pull that off. Yeah. I think I will find a way to make it happen. I mean, chocolate does have all kinds of really positive things in there that produce dopamine, and they help.
All right, you. Yes. So who am I? My name is Kenna Millay, and I get to co-host this awesome new adventure with my husband. This whole life, a bringing together of our 2 passions of mental health and faith. I had my roots in tropical places, but have always loved Minnesota. My dad was raised here up in the Midwest in Winona, Minnesota. And ever since I was a little girl, I would just tell him that that's where I was going to end up. So I made good on my word. And here I am. We've been here for for, 14, 15 years now. Interestingly, I am learning that I am more introverted than I had previously thought. Yeah, definitely part of being in a house of 9, maybe also being your wife. The spectrum just got blown open in ways that I didn't know. And I was like, oh, I'm more in like the middle than I thought. So yeah, I love my early morning workouts, partly because I get to do that with friends, and partly because if it doesn't happen before 7 a.m., like it's just not going to happen. Life is just going to move on without it. And other things. Oh, I do not like coffee. I don't drink coffee. I think of myself as naturally caffeinated, and bad things happen when I introduce more caffeine into my system. And unlike you, I would absolutely choose chips over chocolate any day of the week.
Oh, this is fine.
I will definitely not eat those on air because that would be displeasing.
No, this is complementarity because you can have all the chips. Yes. I will have all the chocolate.
That is kind of how it works, isn't it?
We have the same thing with Starburst, right? Like you prefer the yellows and the oranges because I don't know what's happening in your brain, but that part of your brain is a little bit weird.
They're citrusy and tangy.
I prefer clearly the better colors, the pinks and the reds, right? So you and I can split a bag down the middle. It's the best.
Listeners, did you know there's a hierarchy to Starburst, that it actually reveals something about your personality and your character? You heard it here first.
I'm just not a relativist. I don't know what to tell you. I'm sorry.
Oh my gosh. Tell us more about you, Pat, and about what qualifies you to be on this podcast?
Besides
is that a loaded question?
Being married and going through the normal ups and downs of marriage. Yeah.
True. All right. There's your first credential. Yeah. What else?
Yeah. Went to college at Notre Dame for sociology and theology, where I learned about the integration of the real lives of human beings and their relationship with God. And then continued to get a master's in theology, also from Notre Dame, in catechesis and on bringing the truths of our faith to the real experience of people, helping them to meet Christ and to live in a relationship with him, knowing the truths of our faith. So after that, I spent 15 years in youth ministry, working with high schoolers, but really a surprising amount of my ministry was with adults as well, which I did not anticipate, but doing a lot of ministry with parents and with leaders and with folks who were sharing the wisdom of their experience with our young people and hearing from the youth and the adults alike all the things that were on their heart. It was just a really privileged time to get to know how God was working in their lives, to see the action of God in the lives of real people, and to see what they were struggling with, what their burdens were, what was maybe preventing them from being closer to God. So I loved that. I developed a real passion for evangelization and for helping people find peace and wholeness in their lives. And that brings me to this podcast here. What about you? What's your background and what brings you to this moment?
Yeah. So similarly, shared that path through Notre Dame's ECHO program after finishing my undergrad at Notre Dame in theology. And in ECHO and in the parish ministry afterward, I just kept hearing this call to support marriages and families specifically, like that the Lord was showing me that families are the building blocks of society. I mean, there's so many. I can think of quotes from popes and quotes from saints. I think of Mother Teresa, just acknowledging like that domestic church and its importance, and just really feeling inspired to support that. So I did that a lot in parish ministry, focusing on intergenerational catechesis and in bringing in speakers. I think about some of the first therapists I ever met were speakers who I brought to the parishes I was working at to do some parent education and formation. And then a little stint as a hospital chaplain because I wanted to be able to support people in their time of suffering and great need. But I am potentially the most squeamish person, and wisely a chaplaincy resident said, I don't think this is the call for you, that you get weak in the knees at a blood draw. And so encouraged me to consider marriage and family therapy. And so went back to school when we had 2 children, had 2 more children during that process, and have been in private practice ever since graduating, and am just loving the way that I get to work with clients so deeply and intensely in that one-on-one, the clinical setting. But then also, Pat, you and I have been called forward in a speaking ministry, in a training ministry in recent years, and getting to work with larger groups of folks and share tools that all of us can benefit from. And so I think I'm bringing a lot of that to the podcast too, practical things that I've seen in my clients' lives when we've met with groups that seem to make a difference for those folks. Yeah. So, I mean, those are the credentials, so to speak. But really the main thing that I think about, Pat, like what enables us to be able to offer this podcast and to bring on the guests that we're going that are going to share with us is that we're in this together. Like we are still very much in the trenches of life, right? Our kids are 2 to 11. And so we're coming, I think of shoulder to shoulder, like side by side with you, our listeners, and really wanting to learn and grow together. We do not consider ourselves experts, but we consider ourselves curious enough, maybe foolish enough, to talk about the things that we know have been important in our life, and we're hearing from our community that they want us to bring them more information. And yeah, so that's the vision.
Yeah, the image in my mind is not like we are the professors and you are the students, right? Like we're facing you and we're telling you what's true. It's more like, maybe this is more aggressive than it needs to be, but I think of like Braveheart or like a Civil War movie like that, where there's a general who has a better sense of the plan and the strategy. And maybe he's going to talk to his troops to get them pumped up and to get them fired up and on the same mission. But he's also going to go into battle with them, right?
Yeah.
So this is side-by-side stuff that we're talking about. And you and I out there, I mean, we all know that life can be a battle sometimes, right? And sometimes even family life can be a battle, not against your spouse or your kids, but you're with them and facing life together as a family, So I think that's the stance that really helps me understand what we're doing here, that we've been privileged with a lot of great formation. We've been, like Kenna said, curious or foolish enough to really dive deep in a lot of this stuff. And it's a real joy to be able to go into the fray with you and to come out whole on the far side.
Yeah. I mean, really, our life just demands that we remain in the fray. Like there isn't an option to step out right now. We're committed.
Yep, we're in.
Yeah. So, Pat, maybe you can talk to us about what the episodes will look like so listeners can know what to expect. And if they want to fast forward through all this chitty chat in the beginning, they can do that too.
I am very familiar with the skip 30 seconds button on my little podcast app. But trust me, you're not going to want to do that because it's just too good to be true, the stuff that we have to offer.
Oh my gosh.
So at the beginning, we're going to just do kind of what we're doing now, but in a more structured way, week to week, of just connecting with you, our good listeners, connecting with each other, and specifically, we're going to introduce here in the first episode something called our highs and our hards. So just doing a check-in, me and Kenna together, and we'll give you a little background about where that comes from in our family life. After a little bit of fun and kind of banter at the beginning, we'll move to the real meat and potatoes of the episode. Whatever the topic or the theme of the episode is, many of the episodes will be Kenna and I sharing our relationship, our knowledge, our hopefully wisdom with you. And a lot of times we're going to bring on some guests that also have great backgrounds, some kind of various perspectives from what Kenna and I have to bring, and we'll be able to share their wisdom and presence with you as well. Every episode we're going to end with what we're going to call a challenge by choice. I always think of that from back in my camp days, all of the high ropes and climbing little strategies that we would invite kids to. We would always tell them, this is a challenge by choice. You don't have to do the zip line. No one's going to push you off the platform.
There's no shame.
There's no shame. That's
this,
right.
Yeah.
Exactly. Right. But if you choose, I believe that you can do it. It might just be difficult,
Yeah.
So at the end of every episode, we're going to propose a challenge by choice, a tangible thing for you to do to develop further the theme that we're discussing for that episode, to grow a little bit more, something that is entirely optional because we can't find out whether you did it or not, but it's definitely worth it. It might just be a little bit difficult. And then finally, at the very end, we'll just throw some bloopers at the end to be goofy and real with you.
And keep it humble around here.
Because believe it or not, what you're listening to is not the first live take of this episode, and none of them will be. So there are going to be some real weirdness that we'll throw at the end there. So stick around for those.
I shall mind my P's and Q's.
So speaking of those highs and hards that I mentioned, so just a little glimpse into the Malay family dinner table. First of all, it's real loud. So if you ever come for dinner, just buckle up. Second of all, what we try to do with all of our kids and with each other at the dinner table each night is to check in about the day. A lot of families will do highs and lows, or they'll call them, roses and thorns or something really cute like that. What we use is highs and then hards, not necessarily lows. So a hard is more something that you found challenging today? And maybe it is the low, maybe it's the hardest and most unfortunate thing that happened throughout the course of the day, but maybe it wasn't a low, maybe it was just legitimately hard, So if you had to learn a new idea in math class today and you kind of enjoyed learning it, but it was still really, really difficult for you, or if you're practicing piano and there's this one run that's really difficult, but you're having fun trying to work it out. Or for those of us who are working, maybe there's something at work that you're really passionate about, but it's a real challenge. Those are the hards that we're talking about, something like that. So every episode, we're going to start off like that so you can get to know us a little bit better. And we'd love to hear what your highs and hards were if you feel like sharing those with us throughout the course of the week as well. So ladies first, why don't you kick us off, babe? What's been high and hard for you lately?
Yeah. So, I think for me, my hard lately has been, okay, so one of our older children went away to a sleepaway camp recently for the first time, and it was rustic. Like I got the privilege of taking him to camp, and I had never been there before, didn't know what to expect. I did not grow up really going to camps, and so maybe this is how all camps are, but when we got there, I was like, oh my gosh, I'm leaving my baby in the wilderness. And so I was like truly taken aback. And, in the hours since then, I have noticed like my thoughts are kind of caught up in like, is he putting on his bug spray? Did he remember his sunscreen? Are they feeding him enough? Like, is he sleeping at night? Like just all these things. And I don't know, it's been hard to let go and to like really surrender. P.S. I totally trust the people who are running this camp. It has nothing to do with that, but it's really confronting like my own surrender as a mom and just that mama bear instinct to want to like keep them close and like tucked under my wing, and just pushing through that and like not calling the camp director, every night to check on him.
I like that your mama bear instinct is kind of specifically about whether or not he's going to run into other mama bears in the middle of the woods.
I hadn't even thought of that, Pat.
He's home safe now. It's fine.
So then I'd say my high for sure was our anniversary that we celebrated recently, and getting to go out to dinner alone. The dinner table was much quieter, and we love to do review of the last year on milestone birthdays and anniversaries. And so talking through, just the things we've learned this year in marriage and hopes we have for the year ahead. I don't know. I love those moments. I learn so much about you, and I get excited to like get back in there. I mean, a dinner alone also helps with the excitement. It's like a retreat within our life. But yeah, definitely a high for me.
There are moments in meals like that where I have a minor question in my heart that when the food arrives and I see the look on your face, I think to myself, is she really excited about our anniversary or about this black and blue salad?
Oh my gosh, yes. I mean, I do love food too. But yeah, that could be a different high on a different day.
Both and, yeah.
Yeah. And you, I'm going to toss the ball to you.
So my hard lately has been, so our 2-year-old for a year and 3/4 of her life has been the most angelic child out of all 7. And we don't love her more, but the early years have just been simpler with her.
We were spoiled, let's be clear.
We were spoiled with her more so than with our other 6 children for whatever reason.
She also may have been in just sheer shock like coming into this house.
I do still think that after 6 kids, and especially after our twins right before her, that God was like, you've had enough. We will give you a break. You can have an easy one now.
Is that how that works?
So for a year and 3/4, she was just amiable and peaceful. Literally, like, we don't think that she cried for a year unless a kid bumped into her or something like that. Like, she would wake up from a nap in her crib and just lay there happily until we came and got her.
You shouldn't talk about this too much. People may be clicking off right now, but I would have been.
Don't be frustrated, because we can tell you lots of stories about our other kids. But lately, this sweet, angelic little 2-year-old has become a normal toddler, which means that she has learned the word mine. And she has discovered the feeling of frustration, which she expresses with like a velociraptor shriek, right? So like if someone takes her stuff, she's just like
ringing all the alarms.
Exactly, right. It's very aggressive and really just like grating on my brain. But again, she gave us a year and a half or more of absolute peace. So she's earned the right to scream.
Yeah,
a
how
bit,
long are
I
you going
guess.
to tolerate the velociraptor that's overtaken your toddler's body?
Exactly. Right. Oh my goodness. So that's a hard, but it's a really minor hard. It's just cute and kind of, frustrating it sometimes. My high has definitely been the excitement about this podcast. You and I have been planning and preparing and writing and recording for weeks and weeks and weeks now. And finally, by the time you hear this, good friends, it is launch day. It is happening.
Yeah.
And we are having our launch party on release day on September 4th. And just so much joy about being able to share this experience with you. So
That's awesome.
Yeah, it's going to be great.
I know I share that high with you. Well, let's get going. Let's kick off this episode 1, Seeking Sanity and Sanctity. We thought it appropriate to start with talking about what we're going to talk about for the rest of this podcast and introducing also the idea of integration. So first, what could be helpful is to clarify what we mean with some terms and ideas because we'll be using them so often. We want to make sure we're all on the same page. And so the first thing I think that would be helpful is to talk about what do we mean by mental health, especially in the day and age that we live in. We all probably have different notions of what that entails. And so for us, when we think of mental health, we think about our emotions, our thoughts, and our behaviors, and how they impact what goes on both inside of us and outside of us. So there's that interior process and that exterior process. So inside of me, my mental health affects what I believe about me. So the stories I'm telling about me, I think about things like worth, enoughness, goodness, what I expect of others. So what assumptions am I making? If I do X, how is so-and-so going to respond? That's wrapped up in my mental health, my perspective of the world, that lens that I hold inside of me, how I make my decisions, what goes into making my decisions. Do my emotions get to make my decisions? Does my intellect strictly get to make my decisions? And what motivates my actions out of that? What drives me and what affects me, what affects me. So I'm thinking about what stirs up my joy, my sadness, what things invoke fear in me or bring a sense of loss, what things help me to feel at peace inside of myself, because we still live in a chaotic world, right? Kingdom hasn't come yet. So that's what we mean when we talk about mental health, the emotions, the thoughts, and the behaviors that are affecting what goes on both inside of us and outside of us. On the outside, how I interact with others and the systems, so the groups that I encounter. So that can be my work environment, that can be my school environment, that can be my social community, my church community, and the natural consequences of my choices. How do I react to those? Do I accept the natural choices that come, the natural consequences that come because of my choices, or do I have difficulty accepting that and seeing that connection? So that's what we're thinking about when we describe mental health. We also want to acknowledge that we believe all humans experience challenges in their mental health. I mean, part of what I admire so much about the saints in our faith tradition is that they have been really honest and humble and vulnerable about the distress that they've experienced, feeling far from God or feeling far from others, being in difficult marriages, having children make choices that pain them and that just bring them to their knees. So all of those things, they happen for people, for humanity, for all of time. And it didn't necessarily have to come with a diagnosis, right? It didn't necessarily meet the criteria, so to speak, for a mental health disorder. It's not that clinical level. And I think that's true because, I'm thinking about Therese of Lisieux, who's one of the patrons of our broader organization called the Martin Center for Integration. But she said, the world is thy ship and not thy home. And I think it's reasonable to say that we are all going to need mental health support and resources because we're living kind of this crazy existence of, having our feet here firmly planted on earth in this broken, imperfect world, but having our sights set on heaven and on eternal joy and happiness. And so that disconnect, like we need support to be able to keep that together. Like how do you hold those things together?
And maybe in that realm of mental health, it may be news to folks listening out there. I know it was news to me a few years ago that mental health is a positive thing. Mental health is a gift. You can juxtapose that against when someone says the phrase mental health, many of us automatically, reflexively think of pretty negative, challenging things. Just the phrase mental health often triggers words like depression, anxiety, suicidal thoughts, major kind of negative, challenging thoughts. But the idea of mental health is a great gift from God. All of us enjoy mental health, God willing, and we were made for mental health. The idea that God has given us that gift is the idea of looking at our lives and how the different parts of us work together. My emotions, my intellect, my will, my soul, how do they work together for my flourishing? How do they fulfill the purpose of my life? How can they all come together to fulfill that purpose? And how do I live in my present reality, tolerating its brokenness and the sin of my life, and still keep my eyes set on this eternal reality that I'm not yet totally immersed in, So that's what we mean by mental health, is bringing together all those parts of us to fulfill the call that God has for our lives. When we talk about faith, when we talk about our spiritual life, we're talking about entering into the life of God, our triune God, Father, Son, Holy Spirit, who is a system. He is a relationship. He is the person that we are seeking to love because he loved us first. This is not about just having an experience. It's certainly not about connecting to an energy, but it's a relationship of persons, Father, Son, and Spirit, that we are welcomed into that great community. And we are part of a world that's not controlled by us. This is, the opposite of pop spirituality, you could call it, which claims to maybe control and manipulate energy with stones or thoughts or something like that, So this isn't God on a shelf, This is the living, involved God in our lives. I think of C.S. Lewis, one of my favorite people that I've never met, in his book Miracles, who talks about God not as a God who's waiting on a shelf when we need him, but the God who is pursuing us. He describes him as the hunter, the king, the husband, the God who is intimately involved in our lives out of love. Because it's tempting to think that we are in control, but doesn't life teach us every day that that's not the case, that I'm not in control of the circumstances and the world around me? So in our definition of faith, in our spiritual life, we get to submit to a relationship of love with the God who is love itself.
Yeah. And I think about, that implies free will being engaged. And that is something we will absolutely address when it comes to mental health, how critical free will is. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And if you haven't, maybe caught already, or if you don't know us, we want to be clear up front that we are Catholic. Both of us are Catholic, and we come at the idea of faith from a Catholic perspective. Now, while that is true, we do also believe that there is a truth in the Catholic faith that speaks specifically to the kind of mental health and wholeness that God desires for each of us, no matter what faith you practice, or if you're not of a particular faith practice. We are convinced that these are transcendent truths that can apply to everyone and offer healing in any situation. But it's just good to know our context. So now that we've identified, what do we mean by mental health? What do we mean by faith or the spiritual life? Let's talk about integration, right? That is the aim of this podcast. Whatever the topics are that we'll share in the future episodes, we'll always be looking at, okay, so how do we integrate the faith and mental health around this issue? So for us on this podcast, we're referring specifically to the integration of my mental health and my spiritual life, or that relationship with the Lord. This is something that we feel has been ignored for far too long, that these have an intrinsic connection, and maybe particularly for us as Catholics, really, that's been ignored.
Yeah.
So as Pat and I have prayed about this and have just lived our family life and our marriage, we have seen those two working together hand in hand. we would say that addressing the spiritual life without considering mental health ignores the ways that God wants to use our thoughts and our emotions to communicate with us and about us. And ultimately, like he wants to use that to draw us toward himself and towards each other. And addressing mental health without considering the spiritual life ignores the human person's ultimate purpose. This is not easing discomfort for the sake of discomfort. That's not what we believe mental health care is about. This is restoring right order to our mental health so we can better hear and respond to the Lord.
So it's not just about, I want you to have an easier day. It's about, I want you to be restored to the purpose of your life.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, sainthood, right? We would call that sainthood, being able to respond to that call.
So what does integration look like then? It involves the weaving together, the drawing together, and the gaining strength from each other. That's what integration means in any context. So in this context, it means that our relationship with God and our faith needs to shed light on and strengthen our mental health. That's what we mean when we say seeking sanity and sanctity. And it also means that addressing any dysfunction, any disorder in our mental health is going to allow us to connect with the Lord. That's what this integration is all about. It's a both and. I think back to a situation in college where a good friend of mine who cared about me, I cared about them, gave me the worst compliment of my entire life, and I'm not joking. And it wasn't that they were trying to be mean; it's that they literally were trying to give a genuine compliment.
They were reflecting truth back at
They
you.
were reflecting truth at me very
Yeah.
specifically. So what they said was, at this stage of my life, Pat, you know what I love about you is that you are so Catholic, but you don't make a big deal out of it, and no one would even know by looking at you.
Oh, man. Okay.
So I tried to put on a brave face, and I was like, "Thank you, that means so much. I love you too." And then I went home at night and cried into my pillow because Jesus has a word for people like that, and it's hypocrite, right? Because what I was doing is I was living this disintegrated life. My actions on the outside were not matching my relationship with God on the inside at that stage.
Well, and what I really love ultimately what that story highlights is how intentional of a process this is, right? Like, I don't imagine that you were trying to be a hypocrite.
Correct.
I personally know you. It irritates you when you witness hypocrisy in the world, but I don't know. I've never met anyone who lives an integrated life on accident. It really does require thought and prayer. And I guess that's part of, what this podcast is for, is we want to be, that voice maybe in people's lives that is encouraging them to think about how they can live in a more congruent way, right? That the parts of them are connected, that you wouldn't be Catholic Pat on Sundays and then other Pat the other days of the week. But it requires intentionality.
Other Pat is a nice way to put it for what the other part of my week looked like, probably.
This is not a confessional. You do not have to disclose to us.
And that's why integration is important, right? I mean, since the fall, since Adam and Eve, sin has entered our world. Spoiler alert. All of us, we are broken, we're fractured, we are fragmented. We are living out lives in ways that were not intended by the ways that God made us. Because we're made for a kingdom that is already, but not yet here. The kingdom of God is among us in Christ, and also we're awaiting the fulfillment of that kingdom in heaven. So this earthly life is about receiving God's grace in order to be healed and whole. And if our perception of reality, and if our perception of ourselves even, isn't ordered and healthy, it's going to be way more difficult to receive the grace needed to be healed and whole. The way that Aquinas put it is that grace perfects nature. So if our nature is even more broken than it ought to be, if it's increasingly broken over time, it's going to be more difficult for the grace to penetrate that shell and to really affect transformation in our lives. Because, all too often we can act like that disintegrated body that St. Paul talks about in 1 Corinthians chapter 12. In verse 21 especially, he says, "The eye can't say to the hand, I do not need you, nor again the head to the feet, I do not need you. that's a sign of a disintegrated body. And how often do all of us, listeners out there, the two of us here, how often do we have moments like that where the different parts of our internal being are in conflict with each other, that they don't want to hear what our emotions or our thoughts or our will or our soul has to say about our call and where we're headed?
Yeah, I mean, what you're really describing, Pat, is what a lot of my clients come to me with. Broadly speaking, what they're describing is feeling conflicted or feeling trapped and stuck, feeling bound up because, a part of them wants to go in a particular direction and a part of them wants to go 180 degrees in the opposite way. And so that stalemate that occurs, or that interior chaos that can ensue because there isn't integration, because parts are in direct conflict with one another. I mean, that is, one of the first things I'm looking at with my clients is how is that showing up, and how can they start to listen to these different parts of themselves. And, I think we'll talk about that in future episodes for sure. But it brings to mind that quote from St. Ignatius, "The glory of God is a man fully alive." And I think about that with my clients. Like when they come to me, they want more vitality, right? They're feeling depressed. They're feeling anxious. They're feeling anything but free, anything but authentically themselves. And they're coming to me for that care. When we lack integration, we are not whole. We're not complete. We're using a lot of energy enduring that interior conflict of these parts that are working against each other. So it impedes our ability to be fully alive when we aren't mentally healthy. The glory of God is a man fully alive. That doesn't happen when there's fragmentation and disintegration. So authenticity is one of the ways that a person actually glorifies God, that union of the parts of me, that I'm whole, that I am congruent, my will, my intellect, my emotions, my soul, that all of that comes together. And again, we'll talk about more of this in depth. This is just we're just starting to pave the way here, or give a sense of where we're going.
Tip of the cliched iceberg right here is what we're doing.
Yes, absolutely.
Because the truth is, the deepest truth is that God loves all of you. Not just all of you, like all you people out there, but you individually. He loves the whole you. He loves all of you and will settle for nothing less than all of you. He desires your whole person to be invited into his loving embrace. And we hear this in the famous Shema, the passage from Deuteronomy in the Old Testament, where God says, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord is our God, the Lord alone. Therefore you shall love the Lord your God with your whole heart, your whole being, and with your whole strength." That's from Deuteronomy chapter 6. And that's the beautiful truth that you are meant to be an integrated whole person. And the whole of you, the entire individual you, was made for union with God. So even if you're not quite there yet, just like us, that's the journey and that's the call. That's the blueprint that God has put into your life to be integrated, to have all the different parts of your human person being connected to God and finding joy and freedom from that. So it's that physical experience of our lives, whether it's our physical bodies, our human relationships, our internal thought processes. God is going to use those to communicate with us and to continue showing us his love. So addressing our mental health and being able to acknowledge any disorder in my thoughts, in my emotions, in my behaviors, it's all at the service of being able to hear God more accurately and to respond to him more freely.
Beautiful. I love it. I think we should end there. Should we get rolling with our challenge by choice? Our first challenge by choice.
The very first one. Yep.
Yes. All right.
Better make it really hard.
Here we go. Okay. So each week, Pat mentioned this. Each week, we will invite you to consider a challenge by choice. We invite, we do not impose. These are exercises or often journal prompts that bridge whatever we've just talked about in the episode into your life out there, out where it actually matters and makes a difference. Sidebar, Pat and I want to undertake these challenges with you. I don't know, maybe we'll even talk about it in our Instagram. I'm not sure, but we're on this journey together, I guess is the point of what I'm trying to say. So know that you're in good company as you embrace these challenges by choice. And we'll also have them posted on the show notes in the podcast episode description and on the website, thiswholelifepodcast.com. All right. So for this episode's challenge by choice, I'm inviting you to grab a journal. If you're already into a journaling practice, it can absolutely be your existing journal. If you're not accustomed to journaling, then maybe grab a spiral notebook, or if what will really motivate you is to pick out something delightfully pleasing to the eye, do that. We are not picky. Just do something that works for you. Grab it so that your challenge by choice reflections are all in one place, because there will be a time to reflect on them later on. Okay, so that's part 1 of this week's challenge. And part 2 is the journal prompt. And it goes like this. What is one help and one hindrance going on in my life that impacts my ability to live an integrated life? So let me repeat that one more time. What is one help and one hindrance going on in my life that impacts my ability to live an integrated life? Okay, so if I think about that for myself, something that I've been doing lately that helps me live an integrated life is making time for reading fiction before I go to bed. And actually lately it's been particularly these chapter books that our kids have been recommending to me. I generally tend to read more work or spiritual, nonfiction, but lately I've been taking a dive and into the deep with them, into their fantasy world. It gives me something to connect in conversation with our oldest children, and it means I'm taking at least a little bit of the day to not think about work and carpools and sports schedules and all that jazz. So it's been this really lovely mental exhale at the end of my day, and it's been really enriching to my relationships. So that's been one help. A hindrance would be that the schedule of my current workday, when I think about it, is really jam-packed. The nature of being a therapist, of having very clear appointments with clients and the way that those back up to each other, and then the podcast and the Martin Center work, there's not a lot of white space and not a lot of margin for, the inevitable hiccups that life is just going to throw your way. So I'm recognizing that anxious thoughts and emotions have been creeping up, and that is definitely a hindrance to me, living in the present moment with the Lord. I'd put that in that column.
So the purpose of this challenge by choice is to start considering the choices that we're making, most of them on the daily, that contribute to or detract from a life of being present to God and to the people and tasks that He has set before us. So this is a very first but important step in seeking sanity and sanctity. So in this journaling prompt, you get to ask the Lord to illuminate what He wants you to notice. And if you can replicate that kind of integration into other areas of your life, you'll be moving toward this whole life, which is exactly what we're talking about. It's so exciting.
It is. It's awesome.
Getting started. So pull out your journal, get your challenge by choice underway, and we can't wait to walk this journey with you. It's going to be great. So as we wrap up episode 1 of This Whole Life, we want to invite you specifically and intentionally right off the bat to do all the podcast things that you hear about all the time. So please subscribe to This Whole Life on whatever podcast player you use. Please feel free to share this episode with a friend or with 80 friends. Please rate and review if your player allows you to do that. And if you think we've earned 5 stars and a great review, please write as many glowing adjectives as possible, because it really does. I didn't know this until we started getting into this whole podcast world, Kenna, but those ratings and reviews literally make a huge difference in what podcasts are even visible on a podcast app.
Okay.
So
right.
Literally thousands of people could be introduced to a life of integration and could find more peace and joy in their life if you write a review. So please do everyone that favor if you would. Take 5 seconds to do that. And you can follow us on social media as well. Please follow us on Instagram and Facebook at This Whole Life Podcast, and on Twitter at This Whole Life. And this is not just a one-way street, friends. We want your feedback, your questions, your thoughts, your reflections. You can send us a note by visiting our website at thiswholelifepodcast.com or on any of the social media that we just mentioned. So please talk to us. Let us know what's on your mind. We can't wait to hear from you, and we can't wait to see you again. And I say see in the microphone sense where I don't see you at all. I can't wait to see you again on episode 2. So keep listening, keep loving, and we'll see you next time on This Whole Life.
Thanks for listening. We'll talk to you next time.
You're not alone, you're not alone.
This Whole Life is a production of the Martin Center for Integration. Visit us online at thiswholelifepodcast.com.
You're not alone, you're not alone, you're not alone.
every time we start the podcast episode, I want to say like, good morning. Because that like nothing, no other time of day, no other greeting gets that kind of energy from me. Unless I do like a sound like, hello. Like,
Good evening.
yeah, right? Like, good afternoon. No, sorry.